are hard times for everyone. We are afraid for our children, our elders, and ourselves. But if this time can teach us anything, it's that everyone counts. Every nurse and every doctor, every driver and every clerk, every parent and every child. And if we stand up and take care of each other, we can build a brighter future together. I'm Kimberly Graham, and I approve this message.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kimberly Graham. I'm a candidate for United States Senate here in Iowa, and we are holding one of our many forums that are focusing on specific either constituencies or communities in our state. And today we are focusing on rural communities in particular, which I'm well aware could be weeks and weeks and weeks of conversation. Unfortunately, we only have about an hour here tonight, but we're going to go ahead and do our best to touch on some of the issues that are of critical importance, especially to rural Iowans. So I'm very happy to have with us tonight a couple of great guests who both live in rural communities is it Bodeker, Ruby?
Bodeker, yeah.
Bodeker.
Yes.
Bodeker. So yep. Bodeker. Okay.
Yeah.
So Ruby Bodeker is running for Iowa House District 75. And Soren Peterson is another person that lives in rural area and I think is helping out Ruby too with her campaign.
That's right.
And so I'll just have you each introduce yourselves and tell everybody kind of your, what most people who live rural want to know is like, what's your rural cred? So let's talk about your rural cred, meaning where have you lived, how long, that kind of thing, just so everybody knows. I realize there's some debate as to whether Indianola is rural. I'm well aware. Mm-hmm. About a half an hour south of Des Moines. But for whatever it's worth, I lived in Indianola for 25 years until about a year and a half ago. That's where I raised my son. And it's not a big city. But it's not a tiny town either. It's, I think, last count has roughly 14,000 people in Indianola. But it is pretty close to Des Moines as well. So that's my rural background. My great-great-grandparents had a farm in Ziering back in the early 1900s. My grandmother was from Mount Ayr, which is down in southern Iowa. And my dad is one of 15 siblings from here in central Iowa area. So that's my background for anyone who cares or wants to know. So go ahead, Ruby, tell us about yourself.
Okay. So like you said, my name is Ruby Bodeker. I actually was born and raised in Wisconsin, in rural northwest Wisconsin. It's kind of a sand prairie region, dairy farms. My grandparents were dairy farmers. My mother grew up on a dairy farm. My father's actually from South Texas. He grew up in a very rural county, but in a town. And then I came to Iowa in 1999 to attend Iowa State. And that's where I met my husband. And his family roots are from the Jones County area, but he grew up in Robbins, Iowa. And we made our home in Burlington for a while because he's a Virginian. And that was where he went to be a helper at first and then go through apprenticeship. But then we moved to rural Benton County in around 2008. I took a job up here to teach. I had graduated a couple years before then. I was pregnant very, very young, and my college education took a long time to finish. So I was an older teacher. I think I was 25, maybe 26 when I started teaching. And we chose to live in rural northeast Benton County because my husband actually has, in addition to being a refrigeration fitter, he's has his undergrad degree in cattle and ranch management, and he had always wanted to be a farmer, but his parents, who both grew up on farms, moved off the farm and did not pursue that as their livelihood and getting into farming is very difficult nowadays if you don't have land, if you don't inherit, or at least have your family pass part of it down to you. It's very tricky. So we thought that by me being a teacher and him being in a union, that this would give us the opportunity to live in a rural area and kind of make a living in a different way, but then have farming kind of on the side. And so we do have goats, we have chickens, we have geese. Sometimes we have pigs. We're supposed to get some, but it's been delayed because of COVID. So those are hopefully coming in June. But I didn't teach for very long. And then I did some in-home childcare for a little while. And then I took a job writing for the local newspaper. And I've kind of been doing that for about 3 years now, but I'm also in national service currently. So, but we live in rural Iowa, yes.
Awesome. Thanks. Soren, tell us about you.
Well, I live a few miles down the road from Ruby in town, but there's literally a farm field right across the road from out the backyard, and I see tractors and hear tractors going by frequently to go up to the elevator and other things like that. I grew up in a small town about this size on the Mississippi River, which I wouldn't exactly call a rural area, but my parents both grew up in rural areas. My dad in a very small town in southern Webster County, south of Fort Dodge, and my mom grew up on a farm. And so when I was a kid, we spent a lot of time on the farm with my grandparents, and I used to sit up on a 5-gallon pail turned upside down in the combine with my grandpa until I had to go to school, and then that fun was over. But and at one point, 15 years ago or more, I was my dad's caretaker at a time when he was living, when he was dying, when he was living in a very rural area, actually out in the country where the nearest town was like 4 miles away or so. And it was a very small town of like 300 people or so. So that's my rural cred. Actually, when I asked Ruby why I would be qualified to be in this forum, she said, well, you live in a rural community. And I couldn't disagree with that, I guess. So.
It's very true.
Yep.
Exactly. So what, as each of you see it, what are kind of the top, issues, and especially since I'm especially interested in hearing about this because I'm running for United States Senate, especially on a federal level. What can be done? Like, for example, we hear about the farm bills every 4 years. And while those have to do directly with farming and not directly necessarily with rural living, obviously the two are extraordinarily intertwined with each other. And so what happens with those farm bills affects rural communities quite a bit. Since our farms and farmers are the anchors in a lot of cases of all of those communities. So, farm bills come to mind, investments in infrastructure come to mind, investments in community building on all different levels come to mind. What do you guys see that are needs that are not being addressed?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go for it.
So before this, I tried to make a mental list in my head because I thought, okay, so what are, rural concerns? And really, it seems to me that as a resident of a rural area, what I would want in a United States senator is someone that champions policy that helps us stay resilient, that keeps us rural citizens on the landscape and keeps us healthy and strong, and mostly in an effort to win everywhere is how I like to say it, because I really think that the Democratic Party has failed to compete in rural communities, and I think it's to our detriment, because I think trying to legislate from cities and urban centers only is not a good strategy. Mm-hmm. And if we want to address the changing climate, we need rural communities. We need farmers, we need landowners, we need people in small towns. We need a partnership if we're going to help our youth address this monumental task, which is falling more and more in their lap as we fail each year to address it properly. And so I think if you want to win everywhere, you have to champion the spaces where everyone lives. And rural America is a space that needs champions, that needs somebody out there speaking to our space, and that we have value, as, like you said, being anchors on the community. So I think there's a plethora of issues then that fall under that umbrella. But I think that's number one, what I want in a U.S. Senator is not just someone that drops the word rural, every other word because it's the thing to do, but because they really get that we add value to the conversation and you can't do this without us. So that's my answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my case, I talk about people that live in rural communities because that's part of who I want to represent. Like I guess I tend to push back quite a bit when I hear Democrats. I don't know if Republicans talk about this more or less in general in their rhetoric, but I hear a lot of Democrats talk about this so-called urban-rural divide. And while I do understand there are particular issues, this is just an easy one to just name, like high-speed internet. Like most people who live in Cedar Rapids and Iowa City and Des Moines and Davenport all have that. Like that's not necessary, that's definitely, I would say, not an urban issue. Although even in urban communities, there are lower resource people who don't have access to high-speed internet for other reasons other than you can't get it there. Whereas in rural communities, we have people who can't get it because you just can't get it there. It's just not there to get. So that's a good example where even an issue that I on the surface would have said, oh, that's a rural issue. It's not just a rural issue. And for every single issue I can name like that, unless I'm talking about a physical location, like a rural hospital, like a building that is sitting in a rural community, all of our hospitals, not all, but a lot of them have issues with funding. A lot of them need higher reimbursement rates. It's worse in rural areas, but we've got to address that the rural hospitals are not getting the reimbursement rates from Medicare that they've got to get to survive, and to recognize that rural Iowa, like most rural areas in the country, are populated at a disproportionate rate with our elders. And so it has a disproportionate number of people on Medicare. And so when those reimbursement rates aren't sufficient, it's going to drive those rural hospitals out of existence. And that's a decent example too of, I don't remember ever, if she's done it, I've never heard of Senator Ernst standing up loud and proud and saying over and over and over again that we've got to get reimbursement rates up for rural hospitals. If she said it, I've never heard it. And if she said it, I would think she'd want to publicize the crap out of that because it would make her sound good.
Yes.
So,
right. I would want to hear that.
And I don't know that I've ever heard that. So, yeah. Tim, who's on my staff, is making some comments that I just want to... I don't understand your comment about trying to replace policy with capital, especially in rural communities. We hope that companies will magically bring healthcare, internet access, and jobs. Oh, you're saying that we're just depending on private corporations to do that, Tim, rather than having that be something that we invest in as a government? Yeah. Yep. And Tim mentioned rural education because a lot of our, schools have consolidated, which means that kids are going a really, really long way and spending a lot of time commuting to a school potentially. And also when you lose your school, your community school, that's kind of the beginning of the end. Like that's kind of the downhill slide. If you lose your school, well, then you're not going to probably attract any more new young families to your community because they're just going to go down the road to a community that still does have a school. Childcare in rural areas, healthcare. Yeah, I mean, again, those are all issues that everyone has everywhere in Iowa, but that definitely there's extra challenges. There's like an extra layer in some of those cases just because of the geography and the physical, distance between places. Like childcare, if you live in a town of 1,000 people, there's going to be even fewer spots available if there happens to be a childcare, even in your area. I've heard of a lot of people driving an hour and a half to take their children to childcare that live in rural areas. So, yeah.
In terms of healthcare, so then when I was thinking about if I had to peg a top concern of most people that I speak with who live in rural counties, so counties that I would say, I mean, Vinton, which is Sorn, and that's our zip code, is around 5,000 people, and that's the county seat, and that's the biggest town in House District 75. And we have Marengo and Belle Plaine, which hover around 2,000 and 2,500 people. So we're pretty, our towns are smaller, and we have a lot of open landscape, I would guess you would say, in between. But to me, healthcare is what is the stranglehold on helping us to remain resilient here. There are countless young families that would love to settle here, to come back. Maybe they grew up here and they would like to come back because their parents still live here. Perhaps they'd like to have farming be their full-time job, at least for one of the partners. But without a job off the farm giving you good health care, and by good, I mean basically adequate, you can't do it. So farmers nowadays take on more and more land. They rent more and more land because you can't get into farming. And when a space, a parcel goes up for sale, like there's one by me right now, and the sale actually fell through, which is disappointing because we'd like to keep the farmers that are renting it on it. They live around here. It's going to get gobbled up by a larger farm, because I don't even know how you can get into farming anymore if you do not have access to capital, access to equipment. It's practically impossible. And if a young family had universal health care, that would go a long way to keeping them on the land, or at least getting them on the land. And this is the best example I have as a small town correspondent. So I was covering a farm decisions bill meeting this year, and they were talking about suicide prevention. And one of the scenarios was giving a bunch of protective factors for this particular hypothetical farmer. And just part of the description was that the farmer paid $12,000 a year in insurance premiums. And so after
That's not too bad.
No, so you've got it. After the presenter got through the whole scenario and said, so please now tell me, audience, it was a bunch of farmers and landowners, what are the protective factors? And a participant in the audience raised their hand and said, well, if he's only paying $12,000 a year in health insurance, I'd say that is a protective factor right there. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but in the whole room either groaned or laughed, because seriously, like, what? $12,000, that's all you're paying? If that's what you're paying, please sign me up. And I think that's just indicative of what people in rural areas are dealing with. We want to stay here. We want to live here. We chose to live here, but it's increasingly harder and harder to live out here. When you have to commute long distances, or if you are a farmer, you can barely afford your health care, let alone everything else. That's why a lot of farmers that I know, their spouses teach, because they're able then to access not the greatest health care, but somewhat decent health care, and then IPERS on top of it.
Right, exactly. And I say this over and over again for people that sort of keep looking at a universal single-payer healthcare system as, oh my God, oh, whoa, that's ridiculous. We're never going to have, that's so impossible. We're never, how are we going to pay for that? My answer to that is that even if you can put aside the humanitarian piece of that and the fact that everyone should have good health care that is available to them as part of being an American, period, like part of living in this country, period, that's what you get. Even if we set that aside, the explosion of entrepreneurship and the ability of people to start new businesses, if we just had a universal single-payer healthcare system and nothing else, even if we didn't make any other investments in businesses and in like small businesses, especially what I call micro businesses, because the federal government considers a small business, like you could be making $20 million a year, and the government, like you'd be considered a small business under the feds, like for certain programs and things like that. So first of all, I think we need to like have a different category of small business when we talk about these things. And so to shorthand it, I've been calling them micro businesses, like mom and pop diners, on the town square, in Indianola, the Corner Sundry that's been there for 70 years or 100 years. Truly small businesses, like where the owner is just making enough to pay their own bills, maybe, and maybe not even that. And then, then if all we did was get universal single payer health care, that would improve the cash flow situation and the cash situation of all of these small businesses so much, and then allow more people to start businesses that would feed into our economy and just be amazing. And so it's interesting that there's a film called Fix It Healthcare that you can watch online for free. There's a website called fixithealthcare.com. I don't mention that enough. I need to remember to talk about it more. But it's a 58-minute film, and it was produced by a Pennsylvania businessman, a very wealthy Pennsylvania businessman, very well off. And yes, he talks about humanitarian, but he interviews people from all over the world, all different healthcare systems, including an American doctor who moved to Canada to practice because she was tired of dealing with insurance companies all the time and not just being able to care for her patients. And she's happy as a clam being a doctor in Canada. Yes, great. Yay. We lost another doctor. And it talks about the business side of this. That film, Fix It Healthcare, also talks about the dollars and the cents of it in a business perspective, because a business owner produced this film. And it's just mind-blowing. I mean, in that film, they explain how, and I think they interview one of the company owners of a company that moved the whole operation to Canada, picked up and moved across the northern border, because then they don't have to dealing with medical insurance plans every year and paying their portion and then the employee's portion, and, getting to research plans every single year, and having everything get more expensive. And it's just... It just makes financial sense. And I'm only ever left to conclude, the only reason we don't have that, which is more efficient, which is less expensive, which is more just, is because of the healthcare industry lobby and the pharmaceutical lobby and the oversized influence of corporate money in government, and the influence that the owners and even shareholders of businesses like that, who are in that top, 1 to 10% of American wealth holders, the influence and the ear that they get, the ear of these politicians. And they're the ones with their attorneys knocking on the door of U.S. senators and handing them legislation and saying, could you get this passed? Or, see this? See page 3, one little I, B, subsection D. We don't like that. It's bad for our bottom line. Could you try to get an amendment so that goes away? And that's really what is happening. That's what's happening. And so I hope that voters will start realizing that until or unless they elect regular working people to positions of power, that's not going to change.
No, amen. I completely agree. And I'm going to be honest. The only reason I really think my husband and I were able to make the decision to live where we live, because we wanted to live in a rural area. I grew up in a rural area. My husband had always wanted to live in a rural area, is because of his fantastic union insurance. And it's what they call Cadillac insurance. But every year we get letters telling us that we are going to have to pay more and more and more of those co-pays, that we are going to have a higher deductible. And we're supposedly the ones with the best insurance in the country. And I am not kidding. It's increasingly harder to even afford that. Any union member will tell you that even though we have the best insurance, it's becoming adequate, which is ridiculous. And I just think there are so many people, like you said, that would love to start a small business, or to stay in the place that they are, but it's insurance that's the stranglehold on their necks. And that includes cities and counties, because I know a small town librarian who had her budget drastically cut because when she went back on to the city's insurance and she has children with pre-existing conditions that required quite a bit of care, it cut the library budget big time. And she said to me, what do? I need health care. And I said, yes, you do. You are a public servant. You need health care. It's ridiculous that the budget had to be cut that badly because of the unaffordability of health care in America. So I do think most people will tell you health care is the issue. It is a big issue for people, and it's something that they're going to vote on in Senate races and presidential races. Yes.
Yeah. And I hope that over time, it's not going to happen this year, but I hope that over time, more and more politicians who are not in favor of a universal single-payer healthcare system will be voted out. I hope that the public isn't duped by this so-called public option, which that's a whole other show, as they say. But basically saying you want a public option is just saying, well, we still want the most of the system to go on as it is. And then we're going to do this other little thing over here on the side for poor people. That's
I don't know I tell people all the time, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know how to solve this problem. I just know that we have to solve it. We have to fix this healthcare nightmare in America, because it's a detriment to society that people do not have access to decent healthcare, let alone any healthcare right now.
Right. And
Lauren, you're a small, I don't know exactly how your livelihood works, but are you an LLC?
Very small. Yes. LLC.
Okay. Yes.
Fortunately, I have health insurance, but, deciding to leave a university where I had state provided healthcare and going on my own as a single person LLC, healthcare was probably the biggest concern. Fortunately, I have adequate health insurance now. But, there are still stumbling blocks here and there. Back in January, I had kidney stones. And fortunately, there's a hospital here in Vinton. And I was able to see a doctor, the same morning. But I think they had trouble starting the IV or something like that. And one of the other nurse that could have done it was out that day. And so they had to send me next door to the hospital. And then I'm like, is that going to cost more if I'm in the emergency room having that done? And they're like, shouldn't be, but they didn't know.
No, they don't know.
And no, they don't. And,
nobody
and then
knows. Literally nobody can tell you how much any of your healthcare is going to cost.
Nobody knows.
I wish that were a joke, but I'm like, you guys all know that's why it's funny. It's funny because it's true. No one can tell you. You call your insurance company, they tell you to call your doctor. You call your doctor, they tell you to call your insurance company.
Yep.
And nobody knows how much it's going to cost in the end.
Right. And I've been in that loop in a previous situation where my doctor said, you should go and get the following thing. And so then I'm like, okay, so I went to a different provider who said, it's going to be $1,700 for this. I'm like, I'm sorry, no, I don't have that money. And they said, well, just talk to your insurance company. So I called the insurance company and they said, well, what's the diagnosis code? And I'm like, I don't have one. And they said, well, we can't tell you how much it would be or how much we would cover without the diagnosis code, And so then going back to the kidney stone incident, the same day that I went to the medical clinic here, one of two medical clinics, so we're really fortunate. Got done in the emergency room. And then they sent me to talk to the specialist who was actually from Cedar Rapids and happened to be at the hospital that day because they've got some kind of rotation. And he gave me a couple of different options on how this could be treated. And one of them involved going to the Surgicare at St. Luke's in Cedar Rapids. And I looked at him and I'm like, so is one of these going to be a lot more expensive than the other? And he's like, I don't know. And of course he doesn't know because nobody knows. Nobody in his office would even know that.
No. In that Fix It Healthcare film, which if you guys haven't seen it, you should take a watch. They talk about how just the average American doctor, it was the average American doctor's office spends $84,000 a year just on interfacing between the insurance company and the doctor's office.
Mm-hmm.
So they may have several people that are hired only to deal with the insurance company with pre-approvals and denials and appeals and talking to the insurance company about, we want to prescribe this drug. Oh, you don't want to cover that? Well, okay, what about this one? All of that back and forth nonsense, and how, that's just one little tiny piece of it. And nobody does know. And what other industry... this is so easy to get wound up about because it is all so outrageous. What other industry can you name where you do not know and can never find out how much it's going to cost you in the end?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Before you get the service.
Right.
As an attorney, if I was like doing somebody's mediation and they said, how much is that mediation service going to cost? And I said, I don't know. I'll send you a bill when we're done. Can you imagine how well my practice would do if I never was willing to tell anyone how much I was going to charge them for a service before I rendered it?
Right.
But they get away with that. Why? Well, my suspicion is dollars and cents.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the lobbyists and it's about that influence. Same with, this is a tangent, but student loan industry. Mm-hmm. Why is the student loan industry able to gouge people and basically practice loan sharking and make profits on the backs of people whose families can't pay for their education? Yeah. Gosh, a lot of people think that's part of the government, but no, Sallie Mae and Navient and all that, they're private corporations. Mm-hmm. And nobody's watching what they're doing. And that sort of it slides under the radar.
Right. And I used to have a direct loan from the U.S. Department of Education, and then they sold it to a third party. And so I don't think that I have the federal loan protections anymore that, that are talked about sometimes in the news. And it's scary.
It is. It is. Ruby, Tim was saying, let's talk about kind of the, like identifying he calls them dominoes that lead to the cascade that causes rural communities to die. Like, how is that? I mean, I'm sure it can happen, like there can be different instigating events, but I mean, I can guess, but I don't, if you guys know better than, I'm thinking that part of this is just, it becomes this chicken and egg. It's hard to tell which came first, but when young people leave their rural communities, to either because there aren't sufficient job opportunities there for them. And like we just said, they can't just go into farming, especially if they're over age 26, because then they won't be on their they can't be on their parents' insurance anymore. And if they want to do farming, they can't do that anyway, again, unless they have family who's willing to give them or rent to them or somehow get land to them because it's so expensive to purchase. There is an organization called Sustainable Iowa Land Trust that I'm sure you guys are familiar with, but that tries to help solve that problem because they try to get to hook up available land with younger farmers, with kind of non-traditional farmers, with either immigrants, people of color, women, sort of non-traditional people that typically we don't think of off the top of our head as farmers. And so Sustainable Iowa Land Trust tries to connect those people to get land to new and younger farmers. But that, they're a small nonprofit. And by the way, if anybody who ever happens to see this has a bunch of money, that's one place. Sustainable Iowa Land Trust can always use your help, your financial help.
SILT, that's their acronym, right? SILT, I think it is. Anytime that New Pioneer Food Co-op, and a lot of Benton County farmers sell there, by the way. So if you live in Benton County, House District 75, you are supporting local farmers by shopping at New Pie. And they ask you to round up. I love it when SILT comes up for the weekly roundup because I think that is a great organization. We need more organizations like that. Absolutely. That's awesome that you are championing that organization. I love it.
Another one that I love, another one that I love and that I've participated in one of their field days last summer was Practical Farmers of Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
They're another organization that anyone who, again, who's watching this who hasn't heard of them or whatever, Google them and check them out. They try to connect existing farmers who are farming in sustainable and regenerative ways, using sustainable and regenerative methods of farming, with other farmers who maybe are already farming, but who want to start transitioning their farm operation to a more sustainable and regenerative model. The gentleman whose farm I was at last summer is Ron Rossman. I think it's either Rossman or Roseman. It looks like Rossman to me. There's no E. It's Rosmann, I believe. And in any event, Ron is his first name. He's in Harlan. And he told me the day that we were there, by the way, this was wildly successful. There had to be 100 people there that day at his farm. And I would say that probably 3/4 of those people, just eyeballing it, were actual farmers who were there to learn from Ron about what he's doing. And only about 25% of us were looky-loos, who just wanted to learn ourselves, but who aren't farming, ourselves. But it was just so, so cool. And Ron was explaining to everybody, and I actually heard some audible, facial and shocked facial expressions by some of the farmers when he said, I haven't purchased any nitrogen in 30 years. I have not purchased any nitrogen in 30 years. And yet he's got a thriving, successful farm. And he grows some corn. He grows corn for popcorn, like organic corn for to sell at market for people to actually pop as, not a commodity crop, but like a retail crop. He has some rye, oats. He has some cattle that free range it, pasture raised cattle and hogs. I was literally in the hog pen and it did not stink at all. And this was in July or August. When you raise hogs in a way that is more environmentally sustainable and environmentally friendly, it doesn't produce a blight on the landscape and an offense to your nose like a CAFO does. It's an entirely different kind of thing. But it was just so interesting to hear all these farmers who are used to their conventional farming methods, peppering Ron with questions about what he's doing and how he's doing it and how he's successful. And so it was a real peer-to-peer education. And then of course they're able to be in touch with him as a resource. But yeah, I mean, when I think about why people leave rural communities, I think it's because for the most part, probably usually because they can't stay. They can't get healthcare there, meaning they can't afford it. So they have to go where there's a job that has some healthcare. Mm-hmm. It could be because they feel there's not enough to do, that there's not enough, entertainment opportunities or stores or, things like that. A grocery store leaving a community is huge. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the things that really, that one of the many things that can start that domino effect. Where was I? Battle Creek. I don't know why I suddenly remember that. I was in Battle Creek, Iowa, a couple months ago, just before, a few weeks before we had to stop going and actually traveling and seeing people in person. And we were speaking with this woman an elder woman whose husband still farmed. They had a pretty big operation too. I don't remember, but I remember it was thousands of acres. So they'd obviously bought up a lot of land over the years. And but she ran a little cafe, a little tiny, literally she did all the cooking and all the everything else. She was the only person running this place. And she talked about how they lost their grocery store a number of years back. And now people have to drive 30, 40 minutes to a grocery store. And a lot of the elders there just can't do it. Mm-hmm. They just can't. And so I think that's another piece of this is a lot of elders end up having to leave their community and be moved to a nursing home or something. And maybe they could stay in their home if there were supports available for home health care, but there aren't. So
I think the mentality, and it's not even a mentality, it's just a reality that you have to go big or get out to farm is atrocious. we should be just so ashamed that that's what's happened to rural Iowa, because there are a lot of people that would like to run a hog operation, a small hog operation, and have their hogs out on their land and not have a giant, large factory farm. But how else do you make money? You can't turn a profit anymore if you don't have a huge operation. And it's not fair. We've done this to ourselves because we had to survive. I think that's what happened after the 80s farm crisis, is so many people didn't want to go back to that place again. We had, so many lost farms, people dying by suicide, that we can't return to that. So farmers had to find a way to make it. And going big, using a certain type of seed that makes it easier to farm so that you can wholesale spray a field, that was a way to save the farm. And I don't fault farmers for the way they're farming now. I see the progression and what happened, but I do fault government that we have not done something to help the farming community. Because when the farming community goes, there goes the small town. When you have less people on the land, you have less people in the town. You have less kids in the school. You have less people shopping at that grocery store. So the town falls off, the population falls off. It's like you said, it's a big cycle. And it's going to take some federal investment in rural America, in rural spaces, to save us, to keep us resilient, to keep us on the land. And I think that you and I understand that in order to solve the climate crisis, we have to have rural America on our side. And so we have to champion where they live. And I think candidates like you and me, who are championing working people, and that includes farmers, is the path forward. It is people who are not bought, people who are not bossed, people who know that it is the people that will get us to where we need to be. And I think you are the best candidate for that. I am wholesale on your team, Kimberly. I am. And that is as a rural resident in Iowa. I think you're the path forward. People like you who we can't be beholden anymore to corporations, to big business. It's going to kill small town America.
Yep. And I think it also takes somebody who is truly willing to listen deeply to everyone. And where I'm going with this is, I'm very well aware that there are, last time I looked at this statistic, I believe it was about 48,000 jobs in Iowa are directly tied to ethanol, to our ethanol industry. And so I understand that, and I don't want one person to lose their job, while we also have to start transitioning to do what we have to do to save our planet, really. It's as simple as that, so that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren have a habitable planet to live on. But what a lot of people don't understand is that the plans that I've seen that talk about that transition also call for massive investments, especially in rural communities. And so they call for the building out of more wind energy, more solar energy. And these are equally good paying jobs in a lot of cases to working in an ethanol plant, depending on what job exactly it is you're doing. And these are trades that are trainable. There has to be a just transition. There has to be not just a few months, but a year or two, or whatever it takes, of paid training to train people into other, work. Because we can't continue down the exact same path we're on, even though biofuels are a big improvement over, 100% fossil fuels, no doubt. And there's also technology on the horizon that maybe will continue to come to fruition, kind of a second generation ethanol, so that it's even better for the environment than the current version that we've got available. But, we went down to Moxie Solar, which is a solar company in North Liberty, near Iowa City. And the owner there was telling us that his last several years of business, it has just been growth and growth and growth and growth. And he pays his people well, and they are constantly busy. And we need more of that. We need more people who are out there installing solar panels all over this landscape. We need solar panels on all of our government buildings, all of our schools. Why aren't all of our schools and our federal and state buildings solar powered or wind powered? Why? Mm-hmm. Because we don't insist that it be that way. That's low-hanging fruit. I mean, that's us. The government is us. So if we insist that that happen, it should be happening. It should be happening. Tim said, why can't Vinton be the location of a new solar panel plant? Right. Oh, yes. So Jason, the owner of Moxie Solar, was telling us that the one kind of negative, or not negative, but what am I trying to say? The one thing he wishes was that his solar panels were made in the United States. Because they aren't. I believe he said they're made in China. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's what he said. But the fact remains that there you go. There's a whole industry that, as far as from what Jason told me, seems like it's all centered in China that we need here. We need that industry here, and we need all of our energy ultimately to be independent. We need to be energy independent as a nation. And that has a domino effect on things like foreign policy, because then we don't have to be making foreign policy decisions based on fossil fuel. If we have energy independence, then we're not locked in that game anymore, right? Where we're interacting with the Middle East on an oil basis or a fossil fuel basis in a lot of cases, or that's coloring what we're doing there.
Well, I was going to say, you're speaking to someone who we benefit from the ethanol industry. My husband has several contracts at ethanol plants in northern Iowa near the Minnesota border, and so with the work stoppage and the slow in production because of COVID, leading to less people purchasing.
And before that, the stupid waivers being given to massive corporations that don't need them. P.S. Joni, yeah.
Yep. He was losing work before COVID, and he's lost a significant amount of work right now, like huge contracts that they're just not going to pursue at this time because they don't know what the future holds. But so I tell people all the time, I don't consider myself a conundrum. I literally consider myself, I call myself a prairie voice, because I think I represent what we are right now. This is our reality. We depend on ethanol. We depend on biofuels in this state. We depend on corn. Until we have a third crop that is as profitable as corn and soy, this is our reality. And so we can't write, that industry off. If it's not a bridge, then like you said, it needs to transition. And I think a lot of ethanol producers know that, and they're working on that because they know they have to transition if they're going to make it. A lot of ethanol plants are not going to make it. I just don't know how they're going to make this, but some will. And farmers are still farming. They're still planting their corn. Eventually they'll get to their soy, but this is our reality today. And actually, because you brought up solar panels, I wanted to talk about one thing for sure as a rural resident. So I receive my electricity from a rural electric cooperative, and something that we cannot solve at the state level that has to be federal legislation is breaking those coal contracts that most RECs were tied to in the 60s and the 70s in order to build out their infrastructure. So rural electric cooperatives today cannot become clean energy. We can't move to that green energy because we are tied long-term to those coal contracts, and we can't break them. They were facilitated by the government, and until there's some type of federal legislation, it won't happen. And that is a big deal, because rural America is where we put in these giant wind farms, where we put in these big solar farms, and we can't even take advantage of the fact that we are producing all of this clean energy because we're tied to coal contracts. And I think it was the Center for Rural Affairs that did a huge deep dive into it like a year ago and created a big laundry list of ways to solve it. And it all just came down to, we have to have federal legislation. The best thing would be if it was tied to a farm bill. And hopefully someday you could be part of that. That would be awesome.
Yeah, that is, I'll look into that.
Thank you.
You mentioned like until we have a third crop. I nominate hemp. And
I wish it was, but it just, there's no contracts for it.
The reason I nominate hemp, well, but here's the thing. Every time I go to wherever, pick a place, Campbell's Nutrition in Des Moines, whatever, and buy a bag of hemp seeds or a protein bar with hemp in it or a shampoo with hemp or a lotion made with hemp, I turn over the label, turn it over, and what does the back say? Made in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Made in Canada. Why? Hemp grows here like a frickin' weed. I mean, when my dad was a young boy, they used to drive down to Mount Ayr from Des Moines, and he remembers seeing hemp just like growing wild everywhere. Like it was everywhere. You could like not, you could, you know, you couldn't not grow it. Like it grew everywhere. And so then we finally got it, you know, okayed on a federal level. Okay, we understand hemp is not marijuana, like they're not exact, you know, like we finally figured that all out and got that, you know, figured out. Okay, we legalized hemp cultivation on the federal level. Well, now my understanding is we still have a 40-acre restriction in Iowa. And I would love to know the backstory to that. And I don't know all the backstory to that. Why there was a 40-acre restriction put in place. My guess is, per usual, follow the money. There's some, whether it's industrial agriculture, I don't know what or who it is, but there's probably somebody who doesn't want large scale production of hemp in this state. And that's another instance where not only could we grow hemp here and have a third crop, but that's a particularly versatile crop. You can, like I said, you can put it in, you could have a factory that makes shampoo or fabric or paper or protein powder, or just produce the hemp seeds and package them, because a lot of people like eat those, you know, they're like a wonderful source of protein. There's so many things we could do. We could be building these processing plants in rural communities and employing hundreds of people. And P.S., why don't we make those union jobs? And P.P.S., why don't we have there be like profit sharing so that these rural people actually are getting a financial profit? They have a piece of the profit, right? When that company does well. So it just seems like win, 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 win to me, except for maybe whoever it is that wants us to only be able to grow 40 acres at a time in Iowa, or that one farm can only grow 40 acres of hemp. That doesn't make, I still don't know the reason behind that. Maybe Ruby, when you get to the legislature, you can check that out.
I do think though that, and I can't think of what his bill was called. I wrote it down, but Cory Booker's bill in 2019. Do you remember what that was called? The Farm System Reform Act of 2019. That bill in and of itself would take us leaps and bounds forward in breaking the corporate monopoly that we have in this state. I really hope that we gain control of the Senate, because I think a bill like that could help a lot of people in Iowa and in rural America in general. Because it would.
Remember what was it called again?
The Farm System Reform Act. It would place a moratorium on new and expanding large factory farms, but I think the best part of the bill, it's like $100 billion to help transition farms away from that type of farming, because having a third crop would be good for the environment. That is absolutely for sure, because growing the same crop over and over and over again is why we're losing soil, why we're contaminating water. And so I agree, we do need a third crop. But I think more importantly is we need to make it profitable for farmers to be diverse, like they used to be, 30, 40 years ago. That's just the way people farm. This isn't a new way to farm. It's just the cycle is coming back again.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's what's so interesting. And I remember Ron talking about that at that field day for Practical Farmers of Iowa, is that he was saying, not only is this so much better for the environment, but it's better for my pocketbook. I wouldn't be able to be profitable and make a living on the amount of acres I own, because it's not thousands and thousands of acres that he owns. If I was trying to farm conventionally, I just couldn't. I wouldn't be profitable. And the other thing is that he said this is a lot more labor intensive. And at first blush, you might say, oh, that's bad. No, that's good because it requires more people. It requires more jobs.
Mm-hmm.
It requires that you have more people to pay, and you can afford to pay it if you've got the right supports and you've got, the right mix of things that you're trying to do on your land. But it provides more rural jobs when we go back, I almost never say that because, but when we kind of go back in a way to, the more diverse way of farming, 40, 50 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
it is more labor intensive.
It's true.
No
But it's more, so I always, when I was writing for the paper, would end any interview I was doing with a person that farmed or a rural landowner, if they were an older person, so someone that had been farming for quite a few years, I would always say, if you could go back to farming the way your parents did, or the way maybe you did when you were a young farmer, would you? And they would always get this look on their face, like smiling at me and say, you tell me how. And it's true. Tell me how I can do that. How? And I know there are ways to transition to organic farming, but it's a 3-year transition. It costs quite a bit of money, although we do leave incentives on the table every year for organics. But it's not just, you can't just snap your fingers. And right now, most of our farmers are over the age of 59. And what they want to do is they want to pass that farmland on to their family. They don't want to lose it. And the best way to do that is to just keep the course, just keep going. Make sure that you don't lose the farm before you can pass it on. And so, investing in a diverse way of farming, that's a big decision. And making big decisions like that, that takes a lot. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of courage. It takes just a lot. And asking farmers who are nearing their retirement age to do that is a big deal. And so I understand that. And I think maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, I was way, way more like idealistic and thought, well, all farmers should just diversify. Just put those cover crops in. Get those cattle out there on the land. But the reality is that we need to create an environment where farmers can do that. And we need federal legislation. We need different people in Congress who value that, who don't think you have to go big or get out. Like Sonny Perdue has basically said to dairy farmers in Wisconsin, you should not have to go big in order to survive. That's absolutely nonsense. And I think if we elect different people, we can change the narrative. And I hope we do elect different people because rural America needs it badly.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. One of our couple of campaign slogans is everyone counts. Mm-hmm. And I actually thought about that slogan or came up with that slogan when I was driving out in a very rural area to an event. I think I was by myself. It was last summer. And I was thinking about J.D. Schulten's Don't Forget About Us tour. He named his tour, the tour he's on, I think still right now, was on before he had to stop touring for now. He was going to towns of only under 1,000 people, only under 1,000 residents. So he wasn't going to any county seats unless they were under 1,000. And I was thinking about that, and that was the intention of our second 99 county tour. We completed 87 counties in person and the rest online. But we were going to do a second tour, and I was trying to think of like a way to encapsulate that same sentiment that JD was expressing, like, don't forget about people just because they're from a rural landscape 3.5 hours away in a town of 500 people. Those people count. We all count. We all have value, and we all should be able to make a living and live a healthy and dignified life anywhere, not only in this state, but I think in this country. We just have too much wealth to have any excuses why it should ever be otherwise. And, everything else is details. And the devil's always in the details. But if we keep putting people before profits, then the profits will be there. Mm-hmm. And if we keep putting profits before people, then literally the people won't be there. And a lot of them will lose their lives in the pursuit of other people pursuing profits. Meatpacking Plan is a good example lately.
What was your slogan again that you said? I didn't.
The first one is best Senator money can't buy, and the second one is everyone counts.
Everyone counts. Okay, that's like ours. Ours is we live here too, and even though it originated with the Young Climate activists that I was working with before I decided to run for office. I feel that it says a lot. It's not just, and it isn't just people in the rural areas. I think it's anybody who lacks access, anybody who feels, left behind, like they can't make the decision anymore where to live. They can't make the decision to stay because they can't access healthcare. Or they're on a rural well and their well is contaminated and they have to clean it up because there is no recourse. I just think that is we live here too applies to anybody in rural Iowa. And we need people that champion them at the State House and in our federal offices, because I just don't think the party in power right now sees people. I think you're right. I think all they see is corporations and dollar signs. And I don't understand why, because a lot of working people vote for them and they just leave them behind.
Yep, absolutely. And I have, different people have different opinions about why Senator Ernst was elected or why President Voldemort was elected. That's my own protest. It's been going on since he was elected. I refuse to say that name. Anyway, so, and I believe that for most people, I'm not talking about the small, teeny tiny percentage of just racist asshats who are just really horrible, negative people and have bad motives and are misogynistic and xenophobic and, racist and all of that. I honestly, maybe I'm naive. Okay, fine. But I believe that's a tiny percentage of people. Mm-hmm. I think most people who voted for Joni Ernst and most people who voted for the current president did so because they are so sick and tired of politics as usual. And nothing ever changes, whether it's a Democrat in office or a Republican, at least from their perception. Their life doesn't get any better. Mm-hmm. And so they are willing to say, hey, well, this guy, I don't know. He says he's never going to shut down this factory down here in Keokuk or the Burlington area. He went and stood on the factory floor and said, I will never let these jobs leave America. P.S. They're gone now. Mm-hmm. But he said that. And he said he cared about American workers. And he said he cared about us. And look, he's a really successful businessman. He's not, but a lot of people didn't know that. And so they thought, well, you know what? I'll give this guy a shot. Nobody else has really made my life significantly better. And I think it was similar with Joni Ernst. What do they have in common? Drain the swamp, make them squeal. Those sound like exactly the same slogan to me. Mm-hmm. And what that tells me is that those slogans resonate so sharply with voters because voters are tired of special interests and corporate interests controlling everything. But the little piece of the chain I think we miss is that a lot of kind of regular working people don't understand that connection between Joni Ernst and corporations or President Trump and corporations, and how not only have they not done the things they said they would with draining a swamp or making them squeal, but they've done like the exact polar opposite. They've just brought more big money and corporate influence into government and continue to be influenced by that more than anything else. And I don't know one person's life personally anyway, and I represent abused and neglected kids and mostly single parents in juvenile court for a living. I don't know anyone whose life's gotten better in the last 3 years, like financially or in any other way. So, I think people... I mean,
it's been 6 years. We were supposed to connect every acre. Joni Ernst was a huge proponent of that. I'm still not connected. There are so many people in rural Iowa who are still not connected. Our healthcare costs have gone only up. Yep. Our teachers have lost, our public servants have lost their ability to bargain. And I mean, I know she is a federal, that would be a federal office, but I'm just saying that from the ground level here, I don't know, I don't see anything having gotten better, except that the divide between us is worse than it ever has been in our modern history that we all are cognitive of. So the fact that, you see someone with a Trump sign or a Trump flag, or they're wearing a MAGA hat and you instantly have labeled them is just sad, because he is our president. I mean, as much as some of us wish he was not our president, that's just a sad state of being. It's a horrible way to live. And it's very important that we flip the Senate and that we get a new president. We must have a new president, and he must be not of the party currently, in my opinion, if we're going to make any real change in how we get along with each other.
Right. And, and I think that we can see how little that the Republicans and currently in power, especially in the United States Senate, care about regular working people. We don't have to look any further than the very few pieces of legislation they have passed in the last 3 years. The 2017 tax cuts had massive tax cuts for corporations and for very wealthy folks that are permanent. And there were very, very tiny tax cuts for middle and lower income people that are set to expire in another couple of years, another few years, automatically. So that legislation was written intentionally with the tax cuts to the very wealthy, permanent, and the tax cuts to others automatically sunset after a number of years. And, if they did that only so that people like Joni Ernst could come back to Iowa and say, oh, I voted for a middle-class tax cut. And technically that's true, but it also automatically expires, whereas the one for wealthy people doesn't. And and then we look at the recent stimulus package that was passed a few weeks ago. The idea of sending $1,200 to a hardworking Iowan or American who's like a working, middle and lower middle income person, and then spending billions on bailouts for corporations that in a lot of cases clearly had zero need for them, because some of those corporations have returned the money, like they've literally given it back because they're saying, we didn't ever need this. Why are we getting this? It's just more evidence of the fact that we're not putting people over profits. Most other developed nations in that stimulus package, like Canada, for example, is providing $2,000 per month per adult for the next 3 months so that people can actually stay home and survive. And I understand they've enhanced unemployment, but even that may not, be sufficient. And if we want to keep this economy going and have any chance of doing that, we needed to have invested more than $1,200 one time, which won't even get most families 2 weeks down the road. I mean, that's absolutely shameful and pathetic compared to what corporations got in that stimulus package. So I understand that, I understand humans pretty well after a lot of years as a mediator and an attorney. And I understand how we tend to, me included, everyone, all humans, we tend to put ourselves in tribes and we tend to rationalize our own positions. I also try really, really hard, though, with everything I think about to look at who does this benefit, who does it not benefit, who does it leave out, who does it include, and those are all important analysis to have too, I think. But, well, we should wrap it up. We could talk about this for weeks.
We could.
All this stuff. All this stuff. But thank you so much, Ruby and Soren, for being here. And I'm excited for, do you have a primary, Ruby?
No, we do not. We are the Democratic candidate in House District 75. I know. Yay.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. Yay. We have endorsements now from the Iowa Federation of Labor. So we're very excited about that. You and I are both endorsed by the Sunrise. Well, I'm endorsed by the local Sunrise movement in Cedar Rapids. So I think that the way forward for our party is definitely working people, and that includes farmers, our youth, and unions, because unions, they advocate for everyone, which is we have shown that, because who's speaking up right now for those non-unionized workers in the meatpacking plants? It's the unions. It's not our government. It's not even our elected officials in the trifecta. It's the unions who are speaking for those who don't have a voice because they have one. So we definitely need to champion working people. And I think that's what both of our campaigns have in common. So
absolutely. Well, thank you guys so much. And we'll have this posted on our Facebook page if you want to share it out to your own, whatever you want to use it for, or share it out. And we'll see you hopefully soon. We'll see you in person someday soon.
Thank you so much for inviting us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Soren and Ruby. Talk to you later.
Bye.
Stay well. Bye.
Bye.
I support Kimberly Graham because she's the only candidate in the field that's truly committed to fighting for all of us, not just the special interests.
I first heard about Kimberly because of the brand new Congress endorsement.
By not taking corporate PAC or lobby money, she's showing that she will only be accountable to us.
And we can really use a progressive voice from Iowa in the Senate.
She supports things like the Green New Deal and the Clean Air and Water Act and doesn't take any money from lobbyists. Please join me in voting for my future by voting for Kimberly by mail.